you shouldn't have to like carry every burden yourself, and there are people out there that understand how you're feeling and can actually give you the tips that we know through science work. So go and see your GP, and if you don't love your GP, find a better one, because there are some really wonderful GPs out there who really understand these things, and they can then refer you on. You can get mental health care plans that mean seeing a psychologist is far more affordable, or if it's a physical problem, then go and see, they'll refer you to a good physio and actually, get the help that you need. And then the second thing is just the daily small things that you can do for your health and well-being will impact over in the long run. So, eating a little bit better every day, adding a few more veggies in, getting a little bit more sleep, going to bed a little bit earlier, or spending 5 minutes just focusing on your breathing. These seemingly tiny things, if you add them all together, do really, and I'm sure you would agree with this, Georgie, because I know you talk about this stuff a lot too, but they change your life.
Hello and welcome to the Mind to Lead podcast. I'm Georgie Hubbard and I am on a mission to help you live a level 10 life. If you want to live an extraordinary life, a life full of passion and energy, of joy and abundance, then this is the podcast that teaches you how to do just that. Through my conversations with some extraordinary leaders and my own life experiences, I come to you weekly with all of the teachings and steps you need to take your life to the next level. So if you are ready to develop the mindset it takes to lead, then this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mind to Lead podcast. It's a Monday, I've had about 10 coffees and I'm excited to speak to the beautiful Bec Mitchell today. Bec, amazing to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, Georgie.
So I followed you for the last year on LinkedIn and I just love what you're about. I love all your content, your messaging. So for those of the audience that don't know who you are, could you give a little brief introduction to who is Bec and a little bit about your journey so far?
Of course. So my background is physiotherapy, and I worked as a physio for 7 years or so, trying to make myself enjoy being a physio. I kind of managed to work my way up into working with athletes and working at a really great clinic and, living the physio dream, but just really didn't feel that excited by the whole thing. So I ended up trying to dabble in bits and pieces. I did a certificate in nutrition. I became a meditation teacher and I was kind of trying to find my way. And I ended up moving more into the corporate wellness space. And I've done some work now kind of consulting. I work for a company where I was consulting to Westpac and EY running their wellbeing programs, and have really eventually kind of branched out and ended up doing my own company where I essentially just run wellbeing workshops on a bunch of different topics. And I've now just started also my master's in psychology and neuroscience. So I'm really excited about that, and I feel like I've only been doing it a week, so I'm very cognizant of the fact that it's early stages, so I'm not getting overexcited, but I'm just so excited and so into all of the content that I'm reading, which is so great after years of physio, which was physics and anatomy, and it just didn't really do much for me. And I'm going to incorporate that into my corporate work and my consulting and stuff, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah. I think that's such a refreshing story to hear as well, because there are so many, especially young people, and not even young people, but lots of people I speak to who just kind of fall into careers. They have no idea what they want to do, and they think, well, I've got to go and get a job that pays me this much and do this and do that. Why did you get into physiotherapy in the first place? Was there a reason behind it?
I think it's such an embarrassing, when if I'm really honest about it, it's really, I wanted to do something that I thought everyone would be that's a really great career. Well done. You've ticked the box and you're doing well in life. And I think too, part of it was wanting to, use my enter score. I don't know what it's called these days. I think it's changed to some other name. But anyway, use my score, which was so silly as well. And then also I was such a nerdy kid, not very sporty, really unco. And I think part of me really kind of thought it would make me cooler to be a physio. But it's just that clear. I mean, clearly saying it now, it sounds absurd, but I say that so much to young people, don't pick it for what it looks like. Do not do a course or choose a career based on what it sounds like to other people, because it's clearly, it sounds so obvious, but I think a lot of people do it. It's not going to create the life that you really live and you really want to live. And it's also not going to end up bringing the most out of you, I don't think either.
Yeah, I think that's a hugely powerful message. In fact, I read a book recently. I don't know if you've read it, or if you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. Quite a read.
Yeah.
But one of the key points was, that is the big one: I wish I lived a life true to myself and not for other people. And what you just said then is like that whole society pressure, like, you know, I want to go and get a job because of the way it looks. So when did you realize, how early on into that career, that it wasn't the right choice for you?
I mean, I think probably week 1 of my physio degree, I was like, these are not my people. I mean, I had a really great group of friends, but like most of the people were so different to me, and I like felt like I was having to like crush the personality out of myself to fit into this mold of being a physio. So pretty early on, but I think also I'm just such a perfectionist that I was like, I've got to finish this. I have to prove myself. I have to get through this. If it's a challenge, that means that I should be trying to do it, and I shouldn't wuss out and like quit early on. Like, I've got to keep going. And then I got into the job, and I'm like, maybe if I get a better job, then I'll enjoy it more. It just ends up being this self-fulfilling prophecy of like, suddenly you're so far into it that it feels like you're wasting your time if you quit, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I can completely and utterly sympathize and empathize with both of that, what you just said then. And you also said something really interesting. You said fit in, you know, so I think that's a key piece, that people are trying to fit in. And actually, one of the most courageous thing you can do is go against the grain. So what steps did you take to move away, or like, how did you go about just making the change when you realized that it wasn't for you? What did that look like?
I think from pretty early on in my career, I'd started just like, I mean, I've always been massively into reading. I think we're quite similar like that. Like, I listen to podcasts and I'm always reading different books and trying to understand like, what is it that makes human beings happy, and how is it that you can align your values with your actions and all of those sorts of things. And I guess it just became this sort of long journey of gradually understanding a little bit more about myself and what would make me happy and what would get the most out of myself. And then I would, you know, make lots of coffee dates with people who I knew worked in different industries I thought I might be interested in. I tried like bits and pieces of courses, like I do, you know, I did my meditation teaching certification, and like tried all different bits and pieces to figure out which of those really felt like me and felt like something that I could then use to contribute to the world, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So it's just a case of a bit of trial and error and just trying lots of new things, reading. I love the fact that you said something like as well, like that whole like self-awareness piece and sort of getting to know yourself. Like, I truly believe that self-awareness is the key to self-mastery. So how much time did you sort of spend like researching, reading? Like, were you just completely consumed in it, or like what was your process, and yeah, how did you go about doing that?
I think it's a really good point, and I often think I probably spent almost too much time in that process. It's like paralysis by analysis, and I think that is a big trap. And I was doing those School of Life courses, and it was all like, what's your ultimate career goals, and like how are you going to make the most out of, how do you self-actualize to make the most out of yourself? And I do think there comes a point where action is really necessary. So to a point, yes, I think seeing psychologists is wonderful. I think reading these books is great, and understanding yourself, and that is definitely a lifelong process. But also there comes a point where that repeatedly just trying to analyze, and it almost becomes a bit egotistical, I think, to spend too much in that analyzing phase and not enough time in the actually acting and going out and making a difference in the world phase.
Completely agree. And you said something before that as well, which I think is the biggest reason that holds a lot of people back. It held me back for years, is that whole perfectionism. It's wait, I don't know enough yet. I'm not ready to take that next step. Basically, I'm not enough. So like, this is the thing, there's sometimes you have to, like, there is that leap of faith a little bit, isn't it? Like, okay, I have done so many courses, I've read so many books, now I have to take action. So where did you start to sort of take the action? When did you kind of know, okay, I kind of know enough now, I kind of know enough about who I am, what I want? When did you, was it your intuition? Like, how did you know that you were kind of ready to make this change?
I think, I've always been someone who I really value education. So I guess I'd done enough other courses and stuff that I felt like I was then in a position, and that not everyone needs to do that, but that's just who I am, I get my confidence from having education behind me. So I guess that was one thing. And then the other thing I did was I went and worked for a company that sort of worked in the occupational health space and seeing how they did things and realizing that I thought, well, I hope that I was able to do a better job of that was quite motivating as well, because I'd go and run their workshop based on their content and I was like, God, I'm putting myself to sleep reading this stuff out loud. Like, imagine how the people in the audience are feeling. And that sort of fueled me to think, look, if this is something that's a product that's out there that people are buying, I can surely do a better job of this if I research harder, make it more engaging and exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about your workshops then. So obviously you've mentioned some big clients like Westpac. So, you know, what do these sort of big corporates come to you for? Like, what are the sort of like the key things that they want to implement into the business for when it comes to health and wellness?
It's definitely changed a lot during the post-COVID
I can imagine.
during COVID era, I guess. And, you know, mental health has obviously been the big shift over the last few years. And that's kind of why I'm sort of moving my study and expertise into that area, because I think that's where we're going to be able to have the biggest impact in the corporate space and also where the biggest need is. But I guess I think the biggest thing that they are looking for now, which I'm really excited about, is like people who do have good qualifications, clinical experience, and can, I think most importantly, impact behavioural change. And I think that's probably been the missing link, is that and I talk about this all the time, but we've thrown out like fruit boxes and like have yoga instructors come in once a month and run a class. And it's like, that's lovely and it is great to do those things, but is that making a change to the well-being? And that is the key. Like, is it actually going to create lasting change?
I completely agree. And I think that they are all really good tools, but they are just tools. So if you were like, someone's listening to this right now and, you know, let's just say they really are struggling with their mental health, they're just not in a good place. In your own experience, through your own journey, what advice would you give to those people who are struggling right now and, you know, maybe aren't in a good place mentally, physically? Like, what would the first steps be that you would advise them to take?
I think it's twofold, and I think the first one, and I always think this is the most important one, is do speak to health professionals about it, because you shouldn't have to like carry every burden yourself, and there are people out there that understand how you're feeling and can actually give you the tips that we know through science work. So go and see your GP, and if you don't love your GP, find a better one, because there are some really wonderful GPs out there who really understand these things, and they can then refer you on. You can get mental health care plans that mean seeing a psychologist is far more affordable, or if it's a physical problem, then they'll refer you to a good physio and actually, you know, get the help that you need. And then the second thing is just the daily small things that you can do for your health and well-being will impact over in the long run. So, you know, eating a little bit better every day, adding a few more veggies in, getting a little bit more sleep, going to bed a little bit earlier, or spending 5 minutes just focusing on your breathing. These seemingly tiny things, if you add them all together, do really, and I'm sure you would agree with this, Georgie, because I know you talk about this stuff a lot too, but they change your life. It really makes a difference.
Yeah, 100%. And I can speak from experience here. I used to suffer in my 20s from a terrible anxiety, to the point I'd have panic attacks on the way to work. Similar sort of story to yourself, I guess. I wasn't particularly loving my job and I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. I was in sales and it just wasn't in alignment to my core values and who I was deep down. And I think I've got on my own journey with that. But one of the key things that I really helped me a lot was, yes, I reached out and I got help. That was one of the first things I did. But sleep was a really big one for me, and also the whole meditation piece. That changed my life. And for somebody who has got a very active mind, just to be able to sit in silence just for like 10 minutes just to gather my thoughts and just slow everything down, because like we're just constantly bombarded with information in our day-to-day lives, and it is having a massive impact on our mental well-being. So you've studied meditation, so what, in terms of like, if someone's listening to this right now and go, I'd love to try and maybe start a meditation practice, is there any tips or anything that you can give to people that you learnt for your course and what you were taught?
Yes, I could talk all day about this. I think the first thing is it's not just for like incense burning, fisherman pant wearing hippies. Like I think there's this really big, which is starting to shift, but there is a misconception around meditation, and it now is so evidence-based. The research is there to show us that it really does improve our productivity and our focus and our performance, as well as enhancing all of those other qualities like feeling calmer and more relaxed and reducing anxiety and those sorts of things. I think for beginners, it's the number one thing is to not put pressure on yourself to be really good at it to begin with, is the first thing. And there is no such thing as being good at meditation. However, a lot of people are like, oh, my mind was off in the clouds the whole time and I was planning my grocery list and I didn't do a good job of it, so I'm just going to quit now. But I remember, I think this is a Tim Ferriss quote, and he said, if you at least once during a 10-minute sit for meditation, bring your mind back to what you're meant to be focusing on, whether that's the breath or a body scan or whatever style of meditation you're doing, that is a successful meditation. And I always remember that, because even after meditating for 10 years, there are still days where my mind is like, and I'm sure you're the same, Georgie, like where my mind is just completely insane. I'm like, I'm normally quite good at meditation, good at it in inverted commas, and why am I so bad today? And just remembering that if just once I manage to bring my mind back into the present moment, then I've achieved something through that session. I find that really helpful too.
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it. So I think people say to me, oh, I can't meditate because my thoughts are so busy. I'm like, that's kind of the point. Like, it's not to like, it's just to be aware. I think it's being awareness and then not following the thought. You know, it's just being like, oh, there's another thought. You know, it's just becoming aware. And what I identified through my meditation practice was the common themes and threads and the unconscious thoughts that were coming up, like the limiting beliefs, the fear, the anxiety, and actually the root of where it came from, which was, you know, when I was aware of something, I kind of regained the power, and I was like, no, I don't believe that to be true. I don't think that's going to be the case. And I'd always jump to the worst case scenario. What if this, what if that? But just slowing down and being more aware of what I was thinking and where this fear came from allowed me then to change it and make, you know, those key changes in my life. So yeah, absolutely. And you said something as well, like, don't like put pressure on yourself, because I think what tends to happen, I was speaking to a friend about this the other day, is we start having this big to-do list. Right, I've got to sleep, I've got to exercise, I've got to do meditation, and then we can get overwhelmed by all the wellness stuff. So if you were to say, like, you've mentioned reach out, sleep, but like in terms of someone wanting to start like a self-care practice, like, you know, what's the common themes that you see of people? Do people try and implement all at once, or like what's been your experience there?
I do think, I'm so big into categorizing people, which I know is a bit reductionist and silly, but there really are, like, there's these two ends of the spectrum of people who are like, you know, the type A perfectionists, probably like we are, who are like, I've got to be amazing and like have my morning routine. It's not perfect. And oh my God, I missed one thing from it this morning. Like, I'm going to ruin the whole day, which obviously leads to a whole bunch of like more anxiety and stress related issues, versus the other end of the spectrum who would just really benefit from maybe just doing one thing from that list, and that would really start to boost their health. So I think it's important to know which end of the scale you are, and probably anyone that's listening to this podcast tends to be up the other end of the spectrum, because we're the people that want to consume all of the professional, you know, personal development stuff, and like, how do I make myself better? So I think like that's, in terms of what I see, that is definitely like the dichotomy of personal improvement. And now I feel like I've lost the tangent of the question in the first place. What was the crux of?
So it's like, where should we start? Like, if it's like, obviously seek help, but like how, like, what is it? Just 5 minutes? Is it like, you know, just people get so overwhelmed and like they start like thinking they've got to like be perfect at it. But like, in your experience, like what should people just start doing?
Yeah, I think pick the one. I think in your heart of hearts, you always know the one thing that is your big Achilles heel. And so, you know, if you're someone who sleeps 5 hours a night, you're always tired, you drink like 30 coffees a day, you probably know that that's your thing. Or if your like mind's always just completely insane and you're super stressed all the time, then maybe you know that improving your state of calm is your thing, or your diet, or maybe it's exercise. And I think most of us have one thing that's a big issue. And so find that one thing, write it down, and then think of the smallest thing you can do to improve that. And whether that's like I said before, going to bed 10 minutes earlier, or sitting down and meditating for 2 minutes a day, or going for a walk and like not listening to a podcast, just observing the trees and the sky around you or something once a day. So find the smallest thing that you can do, but commit to doing it every single day at the same time of the day, so that you can be sure that it starts to kind of form that mental habit loop, and then eventually it becomes natural, and then you can look to add a little bit more onto that.
Yeah, beautiful. That's really, really good advice. Now, is there any kind of morning routine that you have? Like, what sort of, let's love to sort of know, like, is there any like health hacks or anything that you found, that anything you do daily that you just go, this works for me? Like, what does a day in the life of Bec Mitchell look like?
All right. Sit down and relax while I take you through my hour and a half.
My pen and pad's ready, so here we go.
So I get up at 5:30 every morning, and that has been a game changer for me. Yeah, I think it's like the 5:30 club.
5 a.m. club, love it.
I haven't made it to the 5 a.m. club yet. I'm still 5:30. But that's key for me, because I think everyone differs a bit, and you don't, again, need to put pressure on yourself to get up early if it doesn't suit you. But for me, I just feel so much happier if I get up early and I get a bunch of stuff ticked and done out of the way before like 7 a.m. and then the rest of the day I can kind of like cruise through, because I've kind of done the important things on my wellbeing list. So I get up and I do a few stretches, and then I go for a run usually. I get back, I meditate straight away as soon as I get back, because I've kind of batched my habits so that they all go one after the other, so I don't have to think too much about it, which is another thing that I've learnt that is really helpful. And then I hydrate, and then I finally have my coffee, and I sit down and I write down 3 things that I'm really excited about today, which is, I think, maybe another Tim Ferriss one, I'm not sure, but I find that is really helpful. I do my gratitude at the end of the day, but I do that 3 things I'm excited about in the morning, which helps just to frame me into looking for what's positive in the day. And even in the most rubbish of days, there's always a few things, whether it's just like your delicious coffee or a phone call with a friend, that you can look forward to. And then I write in my journal, and then write down my 3 MITs, my most important tasks for the day, and then I will usually have my breakfast and then get started with work. So it's my morning in a nutshell.
Brilliant. And in terms of that breakfast piece, as you've spoken a lot about sort of the nutrition part, what's a typical breakfast look like for you?
Well, in the winter, it's very much like oats. I fast for 12 hours. That's like I'm not really into like any longer than that. So I don't have my breakfast until 9 o'clock. And I have oats, and I have like some yogurt and nuts and stuff, and then usually some fruit on there. So just making sure, I think the main thing for me, I'm not really strict about I'm certainly not anti-carb or anything. I'm just really making sure that I get my fruit and veggies in during the day, so that I get my enough serves of each of those, and that I get protein in with most meals and a bit of whole grain. And other than that, I don't fuss too much about diet.
Yeah. You said about fasting as well. I do some of the same things. So I can't fast through the day. I need to eat. And especially I think if you are doing exercise first thing, it's important to refuel. So I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, where they try and fast. Like I've tried to fast like up until lunchtime, and I was just a miserable, snappy, horrible person. So I was just like, nah, last meal of the day is at 6 o'clock. The breakfast is between 8 and 9, and that works for me. I think that's actually a really good health tip there, as well as the whole fasting movement. People are sort of like always looking for those hacks, and intermittent fasting, there's lots of benefits and science to it. But I think it's working out what works for you. So the way we do it, I think, is probably one of the most popular methods. Like don't eat past 7 o'clock, and then try and eat your breakfast a little bit later. I think that's a really good way of doing it. So well, thanks for sharing your morning routine. So how long have you been doing that for?
Oh gosh, it's probably been variations of it for a few years, but I just have been gradually tailoring it. And I think, the other thing that I think is important is that it is good to be a bit flexible with it. Like I went through a period where I was quite rigid, and like if I didn't get to do my morning routine, I'd be like really stressed about it. And that obviously has a lot of downsides too. So it's important to have routine and to create habits which make your life easier, but then to also realize that they're not the be all and end all. And if you're traveling or it's the weekend, then totally don't worry about it. I just get in what I can, and the rest of it, I just think it's more important to be present and enjoy your life than stress too much over it.
100%. And I think that's you just made a really good point there, because like routines, yes, they're fantastic. Yes, I think they are important, especially now with all the other uncertainty. Like I spoke a lot about what we can control. We can always control how we show up and what we do every day, but be kind to yourself. I think there's so many people, especially now, who are like, oh, I'm not exercising enough, I'm not doing this enough, and actually that's causing them more stress. So that whole like kindness, self-compassion movement, like have you, like, I mean, obviously we're women, we beat ourselves up, we're our own worst critics, but like, do you ever, like, how do you deal with like those inner critics, those limiting beliefs that pop up? Like, what do you do about them? Do you still get them, like, and how do you go about overcoming them?
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you mentioned earlier about the anxiety and stuff. I think I'm naturally, like, I've never had like panic attacks or anything, but I'm naturally a bit more hypervigilant, and that's just kind of how I've been brought up, I think. And so I've done a bit of work with CBT, which I found really helpful, which I think is similar to what you mentioned about meditation, where it's just about being more aware of where the beliefs come from and then being able to question whether or not they're true. So it's like, if I'm feeling like I'm not, I don't know, doing a great job of a workshop, and I'm like, oh, they don't seem to be as engaged as I think, and then it's about looking at that and thinking, how do I actually know that they're not enjoying themselves? Like, is it definitely that, or is it that the room maybe is a bit warm and it's after lunch and maybe they're just a bit tired and like don't want to be sitting still for a minute? So if I get them up and moving, then maybe that'll be fine. So I think it's just that understanding psychology has helped, and I've seen a psychologist for a brief period to help understand the way that my mind works, and I advocate for absolutely everyone to see a psychologist at some stage. I think we see physios if we've got a sore knee, or we see our GP to have a checkup, but not enough of us actually, because of the stigma around psychology, we don't go and seek help around how we think about things, I think.
I completely agree. I just think that it's the one thing I hope does change. Like, I think that, everyone's taking selfies on their runs and they're, like going to the gym, but, no one's taking a selfie of, oh, just off to see my shrink, but actually, like, they're the people that are have got it all together, because they are speaking about their thoughts and their emotions and how they're feeling. It's the people who sort of bottle it up that actually end up, internalizing it all and, cause themselves lots of problems. And, I guess I've been so open about my journey because there isn't a stigma to it. And because I went through that anxiety and I got help and I started to understand where it all came from, I actually then became so much stronger in my mind, in my body, and managed it. If I had just ignored it, I wouldn't be sat here right now. And I'm sure you probably feel the same way. You wouldn't have started your business, you wouldn't have found the beliefs. So there really shouldn't be a stigma around reaching out to help, going to see a professional, and yes, we'll do these practices and things, but like, don't be afraid to reach for help. I think that's a really, really big one, especially now when people are spending more time in isolation, they've lost their job, there's lots of crazy stuff happening in the world right now. And, I think now is not the time to be pointing fingers or judging people who are, seeking some help. I think we should be supporting them. We should be cheering them on and saying, go do it, because it's important.
I think I see so many people too who, like it's normalized to deal with this and push it under by like partying every weekend, or like smoking cigarettes, or excessively exercising, and all that stuff is almost considered more acceptable than going and seeing a psychologist, which is like so crazy, isn't it?
I completely agree. And I always say as well, it's like comparison is a thief of joy as well. Like, I'm really big on that. And I think it's really easy right now to sort of look at other people and go, oh, it's all right for them, and, look at them. But in terms of like, in your own life, like, what was the sort of like the underlying beliefs that you had that came up when you were sort of working through and building the Bec that is now? Was there any underlying pattern that you had to overcome?
I think one of the big ones that we've already talked about is like that I had to be perfect. And I think that's been something that I've struggled with my whole life, and I'm certainly far from perfect. So it's not like I ever even got close, or not that any of us can. But I think that was something that everything I did, I was like, I have to make sure this is the best, and that I am the best, and that I can't just pass my degree. I have to like do really well. And I think learning that done is better than perfect, and just ticking boxes is sometimes okay, and like you don't have to do everything absolutely perfectly. That's been I think that when I first spoke to a psychologist and they said that, and I was like, oh, this weight just like came off my shoulders. I was like, oh yeah, like that's so true. And I don't even really value other people who are like trying to be perfectionists. That's not something that I look at and think is really admirable. So it's not even in line with my values at all. So it's really interesting.
That's it. And I think that you said then, like, done is better than perfect. And I always say, like, progress over perfection. Like, the amount of posts and things like I've done. And when I first even started the podcast, like, I had no idea how to do anything. But I thought, screw it, I'm just going to learn. I'm just going to go for it. I'm probably, stuff up a few times, but that's okay. And I just think it's all part of the journey. But ultimately, if you don't go for it, you don't grow. And going back to what you said earlier about the act, people are too scared to act because in fear of making mistakes, failing, not being perfect. So we do live in a society that, I really do think if you can overcome that and you can just trust yourself enough to go for it, then you really can't lose.
Yeah, so true.
But look, I love what you're about. So if anyone was sort of listening to this right now, like, what sort of piece of advice, what's the biggest sort of lesson that you've learned through your journey that you want to pass on to somebody who maybe is a bit of a perfectionist, and wants to maybe start a business or change careers or get a bit fitter and healthier? Like, what advice would you give to that person?
I think like really get to know yourself and get to the point where you can be yourself and not feel like that's not okay, because I think there's no point in, it's the same, whether it's physical or mental well-being or your career, it's all the same. Like if you are trying to make yourself do exercise that you really hate, then you're never going to become someone who healthy living is a part of your lifestyle, because it's always going to make you miserable. So know yourself. Like I bloody hate sport, excuse me swearing. I really don't like sport. Like I've never liked team sport, and I used to try and make myself, and then I just would end up cancelling all my plans and never exercising. And I figured out that what I really like is going for a bit of a slow jog on my own, and sometimes doing a bit of Pilates and yoga, and that's great. So I think like get to take the time to get to know yourself, become okay with yourself, and then once you've done that little bit of work, which I don't think needs to be necessarily a long journey to get to the point where you feel comfortable with acting on that, and then done is better than perfect is always my number one takeaway.
Yeah, I love that. Done is better than perfect. I think that's going to be the title of today's podcast. So Bec, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you and get to know you better?
So everything is just Bec Mitchell. BecMitchell.com is my website, and my Instagram is the same name, and Facebook and everything. So just my name, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I have loved speaking to you today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure our paths will cross at some point when all this is over. Like we can actually travel, and if you're ever in Melbourne or the Gold Coast, then let's definitely catch up and have a coffee. I think we've got lots of things in common and lots of similar beliefs, but it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Mind to Lead podcast. I really hope you got some great takeaways and key learnings from this episode. To help us spread the message, please give us a rating and leave us a review. We love reading your thoughts and your insights and your learnings. And look, reach out to me. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm Georgie Hubbard. Reach out to me on Instagram. I'm Georgie L. Hubbard. Let's connect. I hope you have an incredible day, and I look forward to speaking to you all again soon.